One person is dead in what Russia's calling a massive drone attack in the Moscow region. The defense ministry says its forces shot down dozens of nearly 200 Ukrainian drones launched overnight. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia has successfully tested a nuclear-powered cruise missile. The announcement comes just days after President Trump canceled a meeting with Putin and introduced a new round of sanctions against Russia. Now, Putin says the Kremlin is starting preparations to deploy the new weapon. ABC Chief Foreign Correspondent Ian Pannell and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Mick Mulroy, have more on that. Hi to you both. So, Ian, what's the latest on this new round of strikes overnight?
Yeah, I mean, this was a significant retaliation, if you like, by Ukraine. It has been under heavy bombardment for days, for weeks, for months, many would say for years. But they certainly have escalated. We've seen heavy strikes in the capital, Kyiv. And so this was an attempt by Kyiv to try and strike back, targeting Russian energy infrastructure, as they have done before, military sites, again, which they have targeted. Again, what they would say is the key difference between what Russia has launched and what Ukraine has launched is that Ukraine doesn't deliberately target civilians. Russia insists that it doesn't, but the end result is that civilians are dying in ever-increasing numbers.
Nick, Russia says it successfully tested its new nuclear-capable missile. So what does that mean for the war in Ukraine?
So, Diane, every time Russia gets concerned that the West, particularly the United States, might introduce a new weapon system like the Tomahawk, which would be a very effective long-range missile, they start talking about their nuclear weapons. It's what the NATO countries call the Skyfall. It isn't new. We've known about it for quite some time. It does concern the West because it's essentially very difficult to track because it can stay aloft for long periods of time. But it doesn't really change the dynamics of the nuclear triad for the United States nor Russia. But it is important to point out that the last bilateral agreement between the United States and Russia is set to expire in February. And there's really no talk about extending that. If that expires, then there'll be no cap on nuclear weapons deployed or launch sites in each other's country.
Nick, what message do you think Russia's trying to send with this announcement?
They're trying to send a message not to approve the Tomahawk. They do that. They did that for the F-16, the M1 Abrams, the HIMARS, just about every advanced weapon system that has a significant chance to change the dynamics on the battlefield. They start talking nuclear weapons. The bottom line is the reason why Ukraine's in this is the United States pushed them to give up their nuclear weapons to Russia for the exchange of the United States protecting them against any kind of invasion. So that's where and that was in Budapest, by the way, where the proposed summit was going to happen before the United States canceled it. So this is something that the Russians do every time. Unfortunately, everybody knows they have nuclear weapons. So does the United States. So do several European countries. They should never be used. But ultimately, in order to change this to the point where Putin would agree with a ceasefire, they have to see that they start losing. And the only way to do that is to advance these or send these advanced weapon systems to Ukraine to use against, as Ian said, valid military targets when it comes to Ukraine, not the same way that the Russians target Ukraine.
Ian, Putin's special envoy left the U.S. after a weekend of meetings, including with White House envoy Steve Witkoff in Florida. What's the latest on those talks?
Yeah, I mean, everything Mick says is right on the money there. I mean, it's an extraordinary moment when you're having this high-level Russian envoy inside the United States. I think Russia is concerned. Russia is concerned about the idea of Tomahawk long-range missiles being given to Ukraine without limits. The United Kingdom is pushing other allies of Ukraine to loosen restrictions on the use of their long-range weapons and to supply more of them to Ukraine, and that clearly bothers the Kremlin. I mean, they are worried. As Mick says, every single time there is a possibility that Ukraine gets a little bit stronger, then Russia starts threatening the possibility of some kind of nuclear response, nuclear saber rattling, as we call it. And we saw them deploy the Oreshnik missile earlier when we were in country. I think this was last year. Nuclear capable, but it wasn't nuclear armed at the time. Again, it was really really kind of waving a threat up in the air there. I think the reality on the ground is that the relations right now between Kremlin and the White House are pretty much as bad as they've been since President Trump took over. He believed that he had a good relationship with Vladimir Putin. He hoped that he could end the war rapidly. But I think many people would say, and President Trump has said this himself, that Vladimir Putin has played him. He keeps offering promises but not coming through with anything tangible. And I think the latest straw, if you like, that broke the camel's back why this summit isn't taking place is because Russia said it wouldn't even agree to stop at the current front lines. It still believes it can do more, and that's what led to the sanctions and the deterioration in relations. It's an interesting time. We have to see how it goes. Situation inside Ukraine, though, is still pretty bleak. Dan.
Mick Mulroy, Ian Pannell, thank you both.